The piano had been sitting there for years, untouched by most people who passed it every day. It stood near the corner of a busy public hall, where footsteps never stopped, and voices blended into one constant noise. Some people noticed it, some didn't. Too many. It was just another object in the background, slightly scratched, a few keys faded from use. It had once been placed there to bring joy, but over time, it became something people walked past without a second thought. That afternoon was no different at first. People were rushing through the hall, focused on their own lives. Some were late for appointments. Others were lost in their phones. A few sat nearby, waiting, scrolling, or staring into space. The piano remained silent, as it had been for days. Then he appeared. He didn't stand out in a way that demanded attention. In fact, he blended in so well that most people didn't notice him at first. His clothes were clean, but clearly old, worn from years of use. His shoes showed signs of long walks. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from age, but from a habit of keeping his head low. He carried himself like someone used to being ignored. He stopped a few steps away from the piano and just stood there. For a long moment, he didn't move. He watched people pass, his eyes drifting between the piano and the crowd. Anyone looking closely would have seen the nervous energy in his hands. They opened and closed slowly, as if he were calming himself down. He took a breath, then another, as if gathering courage that had taken him years to build. He had walked past this piano many times before. Every time he told himself the same thing. Not today. Today is not the day. There were always reasons. Too many people, too much noise. Too much fear. Fear of being laughed at. Fear of being told to stop. Fear of being seen. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the way the light fell across the keys. Or maybe it was the heavy feeling in his chest that had followed him for weeks. He didn't fully understand it himself. All he knew was that, if he walked away again, he might never forgive himself. Slowly he stepped closer. A few people nearby noticed the movement. Some glanced over for a second, then looked away, assuming he would do the same thing everyone else did. Look, hesitate, and leave. Others watched with mild curiosity. It wasn't unusual for someone to approach the piano, sit for a moment, then walk off when nerves took over. He reached the piano and gently touched the edge, as if checking whether it was real. His fingers rested there longer than needed. His eyes closed briefly. Then he turned toward the small group sitting closest and spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Can I have one chance?" he asked. "Just one." The question floated in the air, almost lost in the noise of the hall. At first, no one responded. Some people didn't hear him. Others heard but weren't sure he was talking to them. He tried again, slightly louder this time. "One chance at the piano. That's all I ask." A few heads turned fully now. Faces showed confusion. A man nearby raised his eyebrows, surprised. A woman looked him up and down, clearly unsure. Someone else sighed softly, already impatient. There was a pause that felt longer than it really was. Finally, someone asked, "Are you supposed to play here?" He shook his head. "No, but I promise, I won't take long." The answer didn't seem to help his case. A couple of people exchanged looks. One person whispered something to another and shook their head. It was clear what they were thinking. Anyone could see it. This didn't look like a performer. This looked like someone about to embarrass himself. Phones started to come out, not because people expected something special, but because they expected the opposite. A mistake. An awkward moment. Something to laugh about later. He noticed, of course. He saw the sideways glances, the doubtful expressions. He felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising in his face. This was the part that usually made him turn around and leave. But he didn't. Instead, he stood straighter than before. "I've waited a long time," he said quietly. "I just want one chance." There was something in his tone that made the room feel different. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't arrogance. It was honesty. Raw and unpolished. Another pause followed. A staff member nearby hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "All right," they said. "One song. That's it." For a second, he didn't react, as if he hadn't fully believed it would work. Then he nodded quickly, afraid the permission might disappear if he waited too long. "Thank you," he said. As he sat down on the bench, the noise of the hall continued around him, but it felt distant now. The bench creaked slightly under his weight. He adjusted it just a little, careful not to make too much sound. His hands hovered above the keys. Up close, his fingers told a story of their own. They were not soft or smooth. They were marked by work, by years of effort that had nothing to do with music. And yet, the way they floated over the keys suggested familiarity, memory. People were watching more closely now. Some leaned forward without realizing it. Others crossed their arms, waiting for the moment it would all go wrong. Inside, his heart was pounding. He remembered the first time he had ever touched a piano. It wasn't in a fancy place. It wasn't even his. But it had changed something in him that day. Music had become a place where he could speak without words, where pain could turn into something lighter. Life, however, had other plans. Dreams were pushed aside by responsibility. Music became something he carried quietly, privately, like a secret too fragile to share. Until now. He took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. The room felt like it was holding its breath with him. For a brief moment, nothing happened. A few people shifted, thinking he had frozen. Someone coughed. A phone camera zoomed in. Then his fingers moved. The first note was soft, almost unsure, but it was clear. Clean. It echoed just enough to be heard above the noise. A second note followed, then another. Slowly, a simple melody began to form. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. The sound cut through the busy hall in a way no one expected. Conversations faded slightly as people realized this wasn't random noise. This was music. He kept playing, each note flowing into the next. His shoulders relaxed. The tightness in his face eased. It was as if the world he knew was shrinking down to just the piano in his hands. A few people who had been ready to laugh lowered their phones. Confusion replaced their smiles. This was not what they had prepared for. The melody grew clearer, stronger, still simple, but full of feeling. It carried something deeper than skill. It carried a life lived. People who were walking slowed their pace. Some stopped completely. The piano, once ignored, had become the center of the room. And no one knew yet that this was only the beginning. The first few notes had already changed the mood, but most people didn't realize it yet. At the beginning, many still believed it would fall apart at any second. They stood there with crossed arms, waiting for a wrong key, a pause, a mistake that would prove their doubts right. The noise of the hall was still their footsteps, distant voices, an announcement echoing from somewhere far, but something had shifted. The piano was no longer background noise. It was slowly becoming the main voice in the room. He kept his eyes on the keys, not daring to look up. If he looked at the faces watching him, his courage might disappear. His hands moved carefully, not rushing, not trying to impress. Each note felt like a quiet conversation between him and the piano, something personal he hadn't shared in years. Inside his chest, memories stirred. He remembered nights when the world felt too heavy, nights when music was the only thing that made sense. He had learned to play by listening, by repeating sounds until they felt right. There were no teachers guiding him, no applause waiting at the end. Just a small space, a piano that wasn't really his, and time stolen from sleep. Life had never made room for dreams like his, so he made room quietly, without asking. Now sitting here, he felt exposed. Every note carried a piece of him. A woman standing nearby tilted her head slightly. She had been scrolling on her phone, half listening at first, but now her thumb had stopped moving. She looked up, surprised by how calm the music felt. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast, but it had a warmth that felt familiar. Like something remembered from childhood. A man who had earlier sighed in impatience shifted his weight and leaned closer. He frowned, not in anger, but in confusion. This wasn't what he had expected at all. He had expected noise. He had expected chaos. Instead, there was balance. The music continued, steady and gentle. Like a slow walk through memories, he pressed the keys with confidence now. His hands no longer trembled. The piano responded to him as if it recognized him, as if it had been waiting. Each note landed where it should, not perfect, but honest. More people began to notice. Someone walking past slowed down, then stopped completely. Another person removed their headphones, curious about the sound pulling them in. A small group formed without planning. Drawn together by something they couldn't quite explain, the hall, once filled with restless movement, began to feel still. Phones were still recording, but the reason had changed. This wasn't about catching an awkward moment anymore. This was about not wanting to miss something real. He reached a part of the melody that grew slightly stronger, deeper. His left hand added weight, while the right carried the tune forward. The sound filled the space, bouncing gently off walls that had heard thousands of voices. But very little music like this. His breathing slowed. For the first time since he sat down, he allowed himself to feel safe. He remembered how many times he had stopped himself from playing. How many times fear had spoken louder than his heart. People like him weren't supposed to take up space. They weren't supposed to ask for attention. They were meant to stay quiet, to survive, not to dream. But the piano didn't judge. The music didn't care where he came from or what he looked like. It only asked for honesty, and he gave it everything he had. A soft sigh escaped someone in the crowd. Another person wiped their eyes quickly, surprised by their own reaction. The melody wasn't sad, but it carried emotion in a way that reached places words couldn't touch. Even the staff member who had allowed him to play glanced back, eyebrows raised. They hadn't expected this either. The hall was quieter now. Conversations had stopped. The usual rush felt paused, like the world had decided to wait a moment longer. He added a small change to the melody, something unexpected. It wasn't planned. It came from instinct, from feeling. The sound shifted slightly, becoming brighter, hopeful. A child tugged on a parent's sleeve and whispered, "Who is that?" The parent didn't answer. They were too focused on the music. The man at the piano felt something warm rise in his chest. Not pride, not excitement. Relief. Relief that he hadn't walked away. Relief that he had listened to the small voice inside him that said, "Just try." For years, music had been something he played only when no one was listening. Now, strangers were hearing parts of him he had kept hidden. It was terrifying, but also freeing. His fingers moved faster for a brief moment, then slowed again. He let the notes breathe. He wasn't trying to show how much he knew. He was telling a story the only way he could. A story about waiting, about loss, about holding on. Someone in the back quietly stopped recording and simply listened. Another lowered their phone, resting it against their chest. The final section of the piece approached, though no one knew it yet. The music softened, like a sunset fading slowly. He played each note with care, stretching time just enough to let it sink in. His hands felt light. When the last note finally rang out, it lingered in the air longer than expected. He lifted his fingers slowly, not wanting to break the moment. Silence followed, not the awkward kind, not the kind filled with whispers or movement. This silence was full, heavy, respectful. For a second, no one moved. He kept his head down, unsure of what came next. His heart raced again, doubt creeping back in. Maybe they hated it. Maybe they were just being polite. Then someone clapped. One clap turned into a few more. Soft at first, unsure, then louder, stronger. Soon, the sound of applause filled the hall. Echoing off the walls, he looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. People were standing now. Some smiling, some shaking their heads in amazement, others clapping with both hands high, as if trying to say more than words could. His throat tightened. He stood slowly, unsure what to do with his hands. He nodded once, then again, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to this. Applause had never been part of his world. A few people stepped closer. That was beautiful. Someone said, "I didn't expect that," another admitted. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just smiled, small and honest. The staff member approached, no longer hesitant. "You play very well," they said quietly. "Where did you learn?" He shrugged gently. "Just over time." Someone asked if he would play again. Another asked if he had ever performed before. He shook his head. "Not really." The reaction surprised everyone, including himself. As people slowly returned to their routines, the feeling remained. Something had happened there. Something real. Something that couldn't be planned. He stepped away from the piano, giving it one last look. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt seen, and deep down, he knew this moment was only opening a door he had kept closed for far too long. After stepping back from the piano, he stood to the side, letting others move around him. The hall slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but it wasn't the same as before. People walked differently now. Some looked back at the piano as they passed. Some looked at him, then quickly looked away, unsure whether to speak. The air still carried the feeling of what had just happened. He felt it too. His hands were still warm. His fingers slightly stiff from playing. His heart had not fully slowed down. Every sound felt sharper now, every movement clearer. It was as if the music had opened something inside him that couldn't be closed again. A few people came closer. One person simply nodded at him, small smile on their face. Another quietly said thank you before walking away. There were no long conversations, no big questions. Just small moments of connection that felt more powerful than applause. He sat down on a nearby bench, unsure of what to do next. Part of him felt like he should leave before the feeling faded, before doubt returned. Another part wanted to stay, to hold on to this moment for as long as possible. He watched the piano from where he sat. It looked the same as before. Same scratches. Same faded keys. But to him, it felt different now. It wasn't just an object anymore. It felt like a witness as he sat there. His mind drifted backward. He remembered a time when music was his escape, not his fear. When he played without worrying about who was listening. Back then, the piano was a place where he could breathe. Life hadn't been easy, but music made it softer. It gave shape to feelings he didn't know how to explain. Then life grew louder. Responsibilities replaced quiet moments. Survival took priority over dreams. He told himself it was temporary, that he would return to music someday. But days turned into years. And years passed without him noticing. The piano became something he missed quietly now, sitting here. He wondered how many moments he had lost by staying silent. A voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you really done?" Someone asked gently. He looked up. A middle-aged person stood nearby, holding a bag. Eyes curious but kind. "I don't want to push," they continued. But that felt unfinished. He didn't know how to respond. He hadn't planned beyond that one song. That was all he had asked for. That was all he had prepared himself for. "I don't usually play in front of people," he said honestly. They nodded. It showed, in a good way. Before he could answer, another person joined them. Then another. Not a crowd, but enough to make him feel noticed again. The feeling was uncomfortable, but not painful. It was new. Someone asked, "How long have you been playing?" He paused, on and off. "For a long time. Why stop?" Another asked. He smiled softly, not bitter, not sad. Just truthful. Life. There were no more questions after that. They didn't need answers. Everyone understood that word carried more than it seemed. The piano sat there, silent but inviting. He looked at it, then at the people around him. Fear crept back in, quiet but persistent. What if the first time was just luck? What if he couldn't do it again? What if the magic was gone? His chest tightened. Then he remembered how he felt while playing. Not nervous. Not afraid. Free. He stood up slowly. "I can try again," he said, almost to himself. The small group stepped back, giving him space without being asked. No one raised their phone this time. No one whispered. They waited. He returned to the piano, sitting down with more ease than before. The bench no longer creaked loudly, or maybe he just didn't notice it. He rested his hands on the keys, but didn't play right away. This time he looked up. He saw faces. real faces. Curious, open, patient. He didn't feel judged. He felt invited. He took a breath and began again. The first notes were different from before, slower, deeper. This piece wasn't about proving anything. It was about saying something that had been waiting too long to be heard. The melody moved gently, like a conversation late at night. The kind where words aren't rushed, where silence is just as important as sound. The hall responded in its own way. People walking by slowed down. Some stopped. Others leaned against walls or pillars. The usual rush softened again. His fingers moved with more confidence now, but also more care. He wasn't hiding anymore. He allowed the music to carry his story openly. This time, the memories came stronger. He thought of moments he had felt invisible. Moments when he had something to say, but no one asked. Music had always listened. Music never turned away. The piano filled the space with warmth. Someone nearby closed their eyes. Another sat on the floor without realizing it. A worker leaned against a counter, arms crossed, listening instead of watching. The melody built slowly, not loud, but full. It carried pain without bitterness, hope without force. It felt human. He wasn't playing for the crowd anymore. He was playing with them. The connection was quiet, but deep. When the final notes came, they faded slowly, like a breath being released after holding it too long. He lifted his hands gently and let the sound disappear on its own. Again, silence. But this silence felt even stronger than before. No one clapped right away. No one moved. It was as if everyone was afraid to break something fragile. Then someone whispered, "Wow," was enough. Applause followed, softer than before, but more meaningful. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was steady, respectful. He stood up again, but this time he didn't rush away. He bowed his head slightly, not out of habit, but gratitude. A person stepped forward. "You should keep playing," they said. "The world needs this." He smiled, unsure if he believed that yet. Another said, "You made me feel something I forgot." He swallowed hard. Those words stayed with him. When the crowd finally thinned and the hall returned to normal, he remained near the piano. The noise came back slowly, but it no longer felt overwhelming. He placed his hand on the piano once more. Just for a moment, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was asking for permission to exist. He felt like he had found his voice again, and somewhere deep inside, quiet promise formed. This wouldn't be the last time he sat at a piano. This wouldn't be the last time he chose courage over silence. The feeling didn't fade after he stepped away from the piano. It followed him like a quiet echo, staying close even as the hall slowly returned to its usual noise. People began walking again, talking again, checking their phones, but something had changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet real. The space no longer felt rushed. It felt aware. He stood near a wall, letting the moment settle. His chest felt full, not heavy, just full, as if something that had been empty for years was finally filled again. He watched people pass, some whispering to each other, some smiling softly, some still lost in thought. A few looked at him again, longer this time. Not with curiosity or doubt, but with respect. One person stopped and said quietly, "I didn't know music could do that." He nodded. Not trusting his voice, another person said, "I was having a bad day." That helped more than you know. Those words stayed with him. He had never thought of his playing as something that could reach others. For him, music had always been private, a place to hide, a place to survive. Sharing it felt strange, almost unreal. Yet here he was, surrounded by proof that what came from his hands had touched lives. Even if just for a moment, he sat down again, not at the piano, but nearby. He needed a moment to breathe. His hands rested on his knees, fingers still moving slightly, as if the music hadn't fully left them yet. A memory came back to him, clear and sharp. There was a time when he believed his life would look very different. A time when he imagined stages, lights, maybe even applause. But life doesn't always follow imagination. It pulls people in directions they don't choose. Responsibilities appear. Loss arrives without warning. Dreams become quieter until they feel like whispers. For a long time, he'd believed that chapter was over. Now, he wasn't so sure. A staff member approached him again, this time with a softer expression. You know, they said people don't usually stop like that. Not here. He looked up. I didn't mean to cause trouble. They shook their head quickly. You didn't. You did the opposite. They stood there for a second, then added, if you ever want to play again, you don't need to ask. Those words landed deep. He thanked them, standing up slowly. He didn't rush. There was no need to. For once, he didn't feel like time was chasing him. As he walked toward the exit, someone called out, Hey! He turned. A young person held up a phone, not recording now, just holding it. I posted a short clip, they said carefully. People are already asking about you. He felt a small wave of panic rise, then settle. About me? They nodded. Yeah, they want to know who you are. He smiled gently. I'm just someone who plays. They smiled back. That's enough. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler, lighter. He took a deep breath and let it fill his lungs. The noise of the street greeted him, but it didn't overwhelm him. He felt grounded, present. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hadn't checked it in hours. When he finally did, he saw messages he hadn't expected. Old contacts. People he hadn't spoken to in years. Was that you? I saw a video. Is that really you playing? I had no idea. He stopped walking and leaned against a wall, reading each message slowly. His heart beat faster with every one. Not from fear, but from something close to wonder. He replied to a few, keeping his words simple. Yes. Thank you. It means a lot. He didn't know what this moment would turn into. He wasn't thinking that far ahead. For now, it was enough to know that the music hadn't disappeared into the air. It had stayed. It had traveled. That night, sleep came slowly. His mind replayed the day again and again. The first note, the silence. The faces, the feeling of being heard. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. For once, the quiet didn't feel lonely. In the days that followed, small things began to change. He found himself walking differently, standing a little taller. He noticed sounds more, the rhythm of footsteps. The hum of traffic, even silence felt musical now. Messages continued to come in, some from strangers, some from people who shared their own stories, people who said they had given up on something they loved, people who said his playing reminded them of who they used to be. He read every message carefully. He didn't rush through them. Each one felt like a responsibility, but not a heavy one, a meaningful one. One message stood out. Thank you for not giving up. It helped me not give up either. He stared at that line for a long time. A few days later, he returned to the hall. Not to play, just to visit. The piano was there just as before. Same place, same worn look. But now people were sitting near it, talking about it, waiting. Someone recognized him and smiled. Are you going to play today? He paused. Old fear flickered for a second, then faded. Yes, he said. This time no one questioned him. No one doubted him. They made space without being asked. The moment felt natural, earned. As he sat down, he realized something important. This wasn't about attention anymore. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about connection. He played again and again. People listened. Some days he played longer. Some days just a few minutes. Some days he didn't play at all. But each time he did, it felt honest. He began to understand that courage doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, asking only for one small step, one chance. The hall became a place of meaning for him now, not because of what happened once, but because of what continued to happen. Conversations, smiles, shared silence. One afternoon, as he finished playing, a person approached him and said, You know, I think that day changed more than just you. He nodded. It changed me too. As he walked away that evening, he felt something steady inside him. Not excitement, not fear, just certainty. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't need to. What mattered was that he was finally walking it, and it all started with one simple request, spoken softly, but heard by more people than he ever imagined. The days after that moment felt different in a quiet but steady way. Nothing around him changed suddenly. The world didn't stop. Life didn't become easy overnight. But something inside him had shifted, and that made everything else feel possible. He kept going back to the hall. At first he told himself it was just to play a little, to enjoy the piano, while the feeling was still fresh. But soon it became part of his routine. Not every day, and not always for long. Sometimes he played for 10 minutes. Sometimes for half an hour. Sometimes he just sat there, touching the keys without pressing them, letting memories pass through his hands. People began to recognize him, not in a loud or dramatic way, just small signs. A smile from across the room. Someone saving a seat near the piano. A quiet, "I'm glad you're here today." No one treated him like a star. They treated him like a human being who had something real to share, and that mattered more. He noticed how different people reacted to the music. Some closed their eyes, some smiled without realizing it. Some looked thoughtful, as if the sound had unlocked something they had been holding inside for too long. A few wiped tears quickly, hoping no one would notice. He never asked why. He understood without words. Music had once done the same for him. One afternoon, a person sat beside the piano after he finished playing. They didn't speak right away. They just sat there listening to the silence left behind. After a while, they said, "I used to play too." I stopped. He looked at them. "Why?" They shrugged. "Life." He nodded. He didn't need more explanation. "Maybe," he said gently. "It's not too late." They smiled, unsure but hopeful. Moments like that stayed with him. At night, when he was alone, he thought about how close he had come to walking away that first day. Only fear could have won. How many times it already had in the past. The thought made his chest tighten, not with regret, but with understanding. He realized something important. Talent wasn't what had held him back all those years. Fear had. Fear of judgment. Fear of failure. Fear of being seen. And fear had almost taken this moment too. One evening, as he finished playing and stood up, the hall filled with applause again. Not loud, not wild, but full. Honest. He bowed his head slightly, still not fully used to it. As people clapped, he saw someone standing near the back, watching quietly. They didn't clap right away. They just watched him with a thoughtful expression. After the crowd thinned, that person approached. "You play with a lot of feeling," they said. "Not many people do." He thanked them politely, unsure where the conversation was going. They continued. "Have you ever thought about playing? Somewhere else? Not just here?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I never planned any of this." They nodded. That's usually how the best things start. They exchanged a few more words. Nothing promised. Nothing certain. But when the person left, the idea stayed behind. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included music. Not fame, not money, just music. Weeks passed. The video clips continued to circulate quietly online. Nothing overwhelming, but enough that people from different places recognized him. A message arrived from someone who ran a small community event. Another from a local space that hosted open music nights. Each message made his hands shake slightly as he read them. He didn't say yes to everything. He learned something else during this time. He didn't have to say yes to be worthy. He could choose. That alone felt like freedom. The first time he agreed to play somewhere else, his nerves returned full force. His sleep was restless the night before. Doubt whispered again, just as it always had. But this time he knew what to do. He sat quietly and placed his hands on a table, imagining the piano keys. He reminded himself why he played, not for approval, but because music made him feel alive. The performance was simple. A small room, a small audience. No big lights. No. But when he played, the same silence filled the space. The same connection formed. Different people, same feeling. He walked home that night with a calm smile on his face. Nothing was growing now, not fast, not loud, but steady. Months later, he still played at the hall. It remained special to him. It was where everything began, where he learned that his voice mattered. One afternoon, he arrived to find a note taped gently to the piano. "Thank you for reminding us to listen." He read it twice. Then he sat down and played. His music had changed slightly over time, carried more confidence now, but it hadn't lost its honesty. If anything, it felt deeper. It's like someone who had walked through fear and come out kinder on the other side. A child stood nearby, watching him play with wide eyes. After he finished, the child asked, "How did you learn to do that?" He smiled and said, "I listened. A lot." The child nodded seriously, as if that answer meant more than any lesson. As the sun lowered and the hall slowly emptied, he stayed seated for a moment longer than usual. He rested his hands on the keys, not playing, just feeling. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who walked past the piano day after day, the one who believed his moment had passed. He wished he could tell that man something, that it's never too late, that one chance is sometimes enough, that being brave doesn't mean being fearless, it means moving forward anyway. When he finally stood up, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. According to him, he was carrying it with him. Music was no longer just a private escape. It was a bridge between people, between past and present, between who he was and who he was becoming. And all of it began with a simple question, asked by someone who almost stayed silent forever. "Can I have one chance?" That chance didn't just change what others heard. It changed how he saw himself. And that made all the difference.